General principles and concepts of taxation. The city of Taxville. A wonderful, gloriously peaceful, friendly, happy place.
The city of Townsville is on fire!
Thanks to the three heroes, using their ultra superpowers, Polly, Eddie, and Taxi, have dedicated their lives to fighting crimes and the forces of evil. They possess their great, inherent powers. Police power for Polly, eminent domain power for Eddie, and taxation power for Taxi. How do the heroes use their powers? What's the nature of their powers? Police power refers to the inherent power of the sovereign state to provide for safety and to legislate for the protection of health, welfare, and morals of the community. The police power of the state may be exercised through taxation. This power, however, is restricted by the Due Process Clause of Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution, which provides that no person shall be deprived of life or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied the equal protection. Examples are preservation of natural resources, imprisonment of convicted criminals, and regulation of various professions. Eminent domain refers to the power of the sovereign state to take private property for public purpose. The Constitution limits the exercise of the power by providing that property may not be taken without just compensation. What is just compensation? It means paying the owner the full monetary equivalent of the property taken for public use. What is taxation? It may be a power, a process or act, or a means. It is the power to enforce contributions from the state's inhabitants. Nature of taxation power. Essentially a legislative function. For public purposes. Inherent power of sovereignty. Territorial in operation. Tax exemption of government. Strongest among inherent powers. Constitutional and inherent limitations. Inherent power of sovereignty. The government having sovereignty can enforce contributions upon its citizens, even without a specific provision in the Constitution authorizing it. It is so because the state has the supreme power to command and enforce obedience to its will from the people within its jurisdiction. Only the national government exercises inherent power of taxation of the state. Local government units do not possess the inherent power. Essentially a legislative function. The powers to enact laws and ordinances, and to impose and collect taxes, are given to the Congress. The scope of legislative taxing power comprises the following subjects of taxation, such as persons, property, rights and transactions. Apportionment of tax, amount or rate of tax. 5% to 32% for individuals' net taxable income, 30% for corporations' net taxable income, 12% value-added tax based on sales or gross receipts. Situs of taxation, method of tax collection, and purposes of tax. For public purposes. Public taxes are public money. They must be used to finance recognized public needs. Taxes are used to finance constructions and maintenance of roads, health care, education, security, promotion of science, commerce, industry, and others, for the common good or welfare of the general public. Territorial in operation. The country's tax laws are effective and enforceable only within its territorial limits. Except when there exists a privity relationship between the taxing state and the object of tax. What is international comity and privity of relationship? Taxation is bound to observe international comity. This is the courteous recognition, friendly agreement, interaction and respect accorded by one nation to the laws and institutions of another. Where privity of relationship exists, the state can still exercise its taxing powers over its citizen outside its territory. Objects of taxation may refer to the subject to which taxes are imposed. Generally, taxes are imposed on the following persons, whether natural, which refers to individual taxpayers, or juridical, which includes corporations and partnerships. Properties, whether real, personal, tangible, or intangible. And excise objects. Tax exemption of the government. Exemption from taxation is a grant of tax immunity to a particular class of persons or corporations. Tax exemption applies only to government entities, like the Armed Forces of the Philippines, except those performing proprietary functions such as Philippine National Railways and National Power Corporation. Strongest among inherent powers. Taxation power is the strongest of all inherent powers of the government, because without money, the government can neither survive nor dispense any of its other powers and functions effectively. Limitations to the power of taxation. Inherent limitations are the natural restrictions, while the constitutional limitations are the provisions of the fundamental law of the land. If tax law violates the Constitution, such law shall be declared null and void. Any tax law that contradicts the limitation of taxation is also unconstitutional. Equal protection of law means that all persons subject to legislation shall be treated alike under similar circumstances and conditions, both in the privileges conferred and liabilities imposed. The rule of uniformity and equity is observed in taxation, wherein all taxable articles or kinds of the same class are taxed at the same rate. Moreover, Article 3, Section 10 orders that no law impairing the obligation of contracts shall be passed. The origination of appropriation, revenue or tariff bills as dictated in Article 6, Section 24 of the Constitution states that the power to tax is exclusively vested on the House of Representatives, and the Senate may only propose or concur with amendments. Article 6, Section 27 enforces the executive's power to refuse to sign into law a bill that has been passed by the legislature. Once vetoed, 2/3 of the House is required to make the bill of law. Through this, the President's veto power is overturned. No law granting any tax exemption can also be passed without the concurrence of a majority vote of all members of the Congress. All lands, buildings and improvements, actually, directly and exclusively used for religious, charitable or educational purposes are automatically exempt from taxation. Based on the principle of the separation of the church and the state, no public money or property shall ever be used directly or indirectly for religious purposes, unless the latter is assigned in the armed forces, or to any penal institution, government orphanage or leprosarium. Judicial review is limited only to where involves the determination of validity of tax in relation to constitutional precepts or provision, and the determination of the application of law. Furthermore, the judicial tribunals have no concern on the wisdom of taxing act. They cannot inquire on the policy of legislation nor question or refuse the sanction of any law consistent with the Constitution. Albeit, the Supreme Court may provide final judgments in all tax cases. Now, let's talk about poll tax. Poll tax is a tax imposed on a person as a resident within a territory without regard to his property, business or occupation. As governed by Article 3, Section 20, no person shall be imprisoned for debt or non-payment of a poll tax. On the other hand, all money collected on any tax levied for a special purpose shall be treated as a special fund and paid out for such purposes only. Once fulfilled or abandoned, any balance shall be transferred to the general funds of the government. As mandated by Article 6, Section 29, Paragraph 3. Stage 1. Levy. Levy refers to the passage of tax laws and ordinances through the legislature. It is when the nature, subject, objective, rate and base of tax, and the manner of imposing, collecting, and granting of tax exemptions, amnesty and remedies is done. The next stage is the assessment, which involves the appraisal and valuation of the subject of taxation, and the administration and implementation of tax laws by the executive through the BIR and Bureau of Customs. And the last process of taxation is the actual payment of tax. The fundamental principles of a sound tax system based on Adam Smith's canons of taxation are fiscal adequacy, equality, and administrative feasibility. Prospective application of tax laws dictates that the effectivity of the tax law commences upon its approval covering present and future transactions alone. And prescriptibility of taxes stating that taxes in general are not cancelable. Escape includes evasion, which is illegal; avoidance, which is legal; option, which allows the payer to choose a lower rate; shifting, or the transfer of tax burden to another; capitation, or reducing the price of the taxed object; and transformation, where the producer absorbs the tax. We also have exemption from taxation, which can be expressed, implied, or contractual. For those who have overpaid their previous taxes, the excess could actually be used as payment for unsettled tax liabilities, as dictated by the doctrine of equitable recoupment. But as a reminder, set-off, or legal compensation could not be applied, because the taxpayers and the government, under Article 1278 of the Civil Code, are not mutual creditor and debtor of each other. If public funds from taxation are directly and illegally disbursed, a taxpayer suit may arise. This doctrine provides that compromises are generally allowed and enforceable. In behalf of the government, the BIR Commissioner, Collector of Customs, and the Customs Commissioner are allowed to do compromise. This tax doctrine is based on the Marshall dictum, as a taxpayer has no option but to pay the tax imposed to him, while the power to destroy is based on the Holmes doctrine, as a tax burden is only a means to nation building. From the Latin term situs, situs of taxation actually means the place of taxation, where a state has jurisdiction to impose tax over its inhabitants. Determinants are nature of tax, subject matter of tax, source of income, place of business, citizenship, and residence. Generally, a resident Filipino with a source of income from the Philippines is part of the scope. Taxes are a burden, charge, exaction, imposition, or contribution assessed in accordance with some reasonable rule of apportionment by authority of the sovereign state. It is an obligation and is personal to the taxpayer. Characteristics of taxes are: being enforced, is imposed by a legislative body; payable in money form, proportional; intended to raise revenue, used for a public purpose, enforced on persons, properties, or rights; paid regularly, and are imposed by the state under its jurisdiction. Now, to classify them as to purpose, we have fiscal, regulatory, and compensatory. As to object, we have personal, poll or capitation, property, and excise. As to determination of amount, we have ad valorem and specific. As to who bears the burden, we have direct and indirect. As to scope, we have national, or local, or municipal. And finally, as to rate, we have proportional, progressive, regressive, digressive, or mixed. And the Philippines uses a progressive one. Other charges and fees for taxation include penalty, revenue, debt, toll, license fee. custom duties, subsidy, tariff, margin fee, and special assessment. Tax law is a body of laws including income, estate, gift, excise, stamp and other taxes. Comprising Republic Act 8424 known as the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 or the Tax Code. The Supreme Court has the exclusive power of constructing and interpreting laws for strict imposition of the tax laws. Tax laws could be coming from Constitution, statutes, judicial decisions, executive orders, tax treaties and conventions. Revenue regulations, BIR memorandum circulars and Bureau of Customs memorandum orders, BIR rulings, and local tax ordinances.
Created using Powtoon.